Welcome to Beat Diabetes, where we discuss ways and means to drive away that bully of diabetes and live with normal blood sugar. On today's program, we'll hear from a man who had an A1c of 17. That's right, 17. And got it down into the fives in a matter of a few months. And we'll learn about a diet plan that can reduce your A1c drastically. And it's not even that hard. In fact, I would call it simple. And let me just tell you how I discovered the method that I use for myself, which is to test yourself before and after meals, or at the very least to test yourself after meals. I don't always test myself before. I usually will when I'm doing something for this YouTube channel. But a lot of times at home, I just want to know, where am I going to peak? I've got a pretty good idea where I was before without testing. So anyway, find out what those peaks are. So let me tell you where all this began. I think I've mentioned it in one or two videos before, but for some of our new people, let me just tell you how all this unraveled in my life, or unfolded, I guess is a better word. I was at a point where my blood sugar was bouncing up and down. It was going way too high and then dropping way too low. It was just crazy. I had an overreactive pancreas, an overreactive metabolic system, and I was miserable. There were times where it would drop so low I would be ready to faint. One time I did faint. Other times I felt like fainting. I remember I was at a Walmart store, and I just felt like I'm going to pass out any second, and I had to rush to the car and just sit in the car for a little while to try to regain my composure and try to keep from fainting. So things were going terrible for me. I was at times eating every 2.5 to 3 hours just to make sure I kept my blood sugar from dropping too low. But it was also going way too high. And so I was a mess. And the secretary at my job, I was working with Lamb and Lion Ministries at the time, and I was doing a lot of meetings all over the U.S. So I had traveled and did conferences for churches. And the secretary at the ministry where I worked gave me a blood sugar testing kit, gave me my first micrometer, and she taught me how to use it. So I was on a trip at the time. This is when the great revelation hit me and the light bulb came on over my head. I was on a trip, and I thought, okay, I'm going to test myself after my meals and see what different meals do to me. And the first meal I tested on that particular trip, I had a great big hamburger, which had a great big top and bottom bun. So big hamburger with big old bun, and I had a bunch of Fritos corn chips. Now you say, well, that doesn't sound like a good meal to eat for someone with blood sugar problems. You're right. It wasn't, but I didn't know any better. This is when I got the revelation. So the great big hamburger, the great big bun, the chips jumped up to about 185, which, for some of you that get up into 300 and 400, you say, well, that's nothing. But for me, I knew that wasn't good. And so I was disgusted. I was depressed. I went for a walk to try to walk my way, get my glucose down through a walk. Didn't seem to help a lot, but it, of course, finally did come down. So, meal number one, depressing, miserable. And the next day, I thought, okay, what can I do? What better choice can I make as a meal? And so I decided, I went to a restaurant and I ordered a Cobb salad, a kind that has little chunks of ham and chicken and garden vegetables in it and some cheese. And I think it had like one egg, a boiled egg in it, mixed in it. So I think I probably had ranch dressing and my Cobb salad. I waited the same time. I think it was about an hour after I finished my meal, which is what I still do today. And I tested myself, and the glucose was around 120. Now, I may not be the brightest bulb in the pack, but when I eat one meal and it ejects my blood sugar up to 185, and then I eat another meal around the same time of the day, and I get just as full, and really it tasted about just as good, and it only jumps up to 120. I began to make a connection. There's something related to what I put in my mouth that's going to affect the numbers I see on my glucose meter. Now, that was the beginning of thousands of blood sugar tests I've done on all kinds of foods. Now, I could have just stayed with eating Cobb salads all the time. Every morning, Cobb salad. Every lunchtime, Cobb salad. And I would have had fine glucose. But who wants to do that? That's boring. And our world is filled with all kinds of foods you can eat and keep your glucose levels at a reasonable level. It's not like a Cobb salad's the only thing, but that was one. That was on my list. Check. It works. Hamburger with a big bun and Fritos corn chips, X, it doesn't work. Get rid of it. Don't eat it anymore. And it's amazing. Now, if you wanted to, if your blood sugar is crazy, you could pick out, hopefully not one meal, but maybe 3 or 4 meals that you can clearly see have very minimal impact upon blood sugar, like a Cobb salad and a number of other meals. You could do a hamburger and some green beans. That would have very little impact, and so many different meals you could choose from. But pick, if you were way up there, say you got an A1c of 12, and you just say, okay, for the next 3 months, I know I can't live like this forever, but for the next 3 months, I'm going to limit my meals to A, B, C, and D, and they're all very low-carb meals. You would have such a phenomenally improved A1c. Your doctor would be shocked. You would be amazed. You would be dancing for joy. Now, once you get a handle on this and you get it figured out, then you can start doing your research and saying, okay, well, I found 4 meals that work for me clearly. And they brought me down from an A1c of 12 down to an A1c of 5.8 or 6.1 or whatever it turns out to be. Let's see what other meals can work for me like this. And you start experimenting and modifying and trying different things and eliminating some and adding others to your list. And before long, your list gets bigger and bigger and bigger of approved meals. And the sky's really the limit. There's all kinds of choices you can make. Now, as I've said frequently, I'm kind of a dull guy, and it doesn't take much to satisfy me, so I can eat the same meal over and over. But I've got a number of meals that I can choose from. But if you really want to get creative and you say, I don't want just 8 or 10 meals, I want 150 different meals that work for me, you can get them. There's plenty of low-carb meals that won't drive your blood sugar crazy. When you take that approach and then you add some time-restricted eating and you cut your eating window down to about 6 hours, skip breakfast, maybe have some bulletproof coffee, and then you have your meal at 12:30 and 6:30 or so, and then you're done for the day. You add those two things together, your glucose levels, your A1c can't help but improve, not just slightly. We're not just talking about a slight improvement. You go from a 12.0 A1c to a 10.7. That's a slight improvement. I mean, it's better than going the other direction for sure. But your A1c almost surely will improve dramatically, radically, phenomenally. What other words can I think to use? Your A1c is going to be so much better. And here's the question. Could you not do that experiment for 3 months' time? And then after that, start figuring some other things out, but just say, okay, for the next 3 months, I just want to try this. I'm just going to see. The doctors told me I've got a terrible A1c. I'm urinating all the time. I'm thirsty all the time. My eyes are fuzzy. Surely anything is better than this. So for the next 3 months, I am going to eat meals A, B, C, and D, meals that you've chosen. Now, if you're taking insulin, you better watch it, because if you cut your carbs way down like that, you're not going to need as much insulin. So be in talks with your doctor and make sure that he's on board and that you can adjust your insulin properly. If you're not on insulin and you're not on high-powered meds, you've got more freedom. But anyway, to do it for 3 months, what could you not do for 3 months? It's not like we're asking you to go into some kind of a prison somewhere and be tortured for 3 months. Just asking you to limit your diet for 3 months to meals that you know you're convinced absolutely work for you. If you will do that, almost certainly you will be so pleased and so thrilled at the results you get. And after those 3 months, you say, okay, well, I've depended on A, B, C, and D, but now let's add an E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and so forth. Let's add some more meals to the repertoire, and you can do that as well. So victory is really not all that hard for type 2 diabetics. And if you watch Dr. Bernstein, he'll even tell you it's not all that hard for type 1s. Now, granted, there is some sacrifice that will have to be made. So I'm not suggesting there's no sacrifices involved. I am saying that if you're willing to make a few sacrifices, you'll do it. And I know that if you are suffering tremendously from diabetes, if you've got any sense at all, you'll be willing to make those sacrifices. Here is an individual who says, "Hi, Dennis. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 6 months ago, not all that long. Listen to this. My glucose was at 500. I mean, that's terrible. My A1c was at 17. I mean, this is just about as bad as it gets. It really hardly gets any worse than that if you're walking around and still living and functioning. In fact, a lot of people couldn't function with that. With an A1c of 17, they'd be in the hospital or they'd be dead. But some people have stronger constitutions and they can get by with it for a while. So just 6 months ago, glucose at 500, A1c of 17. He says, the interesting thing is that I went to the hospital for unusual weight loss. Well, when you start losing weight on diabetes, you know it's serious because it means your pancreas just isn't producing much insulin at all. Pancreas, when it's producing a lot of insulin, you'll gain weight. And most type 2 diabetics gain weight, and they have trouble with obesity. This guy's losing weight like crazy, and he's down to 129 pounds. So it means he's producing very little insulin. He says, I was going to the gym. I thought the gym was working well. I was losing weight, but I was wrong. There was another story. Sure there was. And he says, my doctor says I broke the records in the hospital for my A1c. You know that's pretty bad when the doctor says, you're the worst diabetic we've ever seen in terms of A1c. We've never seen a 17. He probably has seen 8s, 9s, 10s, 12s, but never a 17. So he says, you broke the record here for this hospital. I was hospitalized, he says, for a day, and doctors and healthcare professionals scared me rather than giving hope. Well, I'm a little conflicted about that statement. I think a lot of diabetics need to be scared, but they also need hope as well. So if they scared you, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Anybody that's got serious diabetes needs to be scared, but they should also offer hope. It's kind of like the whip and the carrot. You provide both. A little motivation from fear, a little motivation from hope, and you've got something powerful there. So he says they scared me, but they didn't really give me much hope. Well, that's too bad. He says, I saw darkness everywhere when I walked out the hospital door. It was just dark, gloomy, depressing. A week later, I searched on YouTube and I saw you talking about diabetes. And he says this very simply. He says, I tried it. I tried it. What did he try? Well, I imagine he tried what I constantly recommend, which is test your blood sugar and eliminate the foods that raise your blood sugar much and stick with the ones that don't. I tried it, he says. And then again, he's got the gift of simplicity here. He says, it worked well. Love it. My doctor says I don't have to check my blood sugar after meals, but when I started watching your videos, I started checking like crazy. He says, I went for another lab in 3 months. Now, 3 months before that, he's at an A1c of 17. I mean, this stuff is so unbelievable. And yet I know it's true. I hear it, frequently. This is about the most severe case, granted, but nevertheless. He says, I went for a second lab in 3 months, and my A1c was 5.8. You are a lifesaver, he says to me. Wow, wow, wow. There's so much in what he says. He says, my doctor says, you don't need to check your blood sugar after meals. He says, but I ignored him and checked it and started checking like crazy. Well, obviously it worked pretty well to get down from a 17 to a 5.8. Is there any medication that can do that? I don't think so. They can help for sure, and I'm not against medication, diabetes meds, but I don't know of any med that can get you from a 17 to a 5.8 by taking it for 3 months. If there was such a pill, we all ought to be taking it, I suppose. But he says in 3 months it was 5.8. You're a lifesaver. You know, there are a lot of things in the area of health that you just have to take it on faith, or maybe don't take it for a lack of faith. You know, somebody comes along and says, I've got this new pill or this new food, and it's a health food, and if you take this or you eat this, you'll feel so much better. You'll have more energy than ever. And he goes on and on with all these vague claims, but you can't prove it. And there's no way you can look in your body and say, well, I had an energy level of 6.4 yesterday, but now I've been taking this and it's up to 7.2. You know, there's no way you can measure that other than just the subjective feeling. Well, I feel better. And sometimes we can just feel better due to a psychological phenomenon that I'm taking this medicine or this food or this supplement that's supposed to make me feel better. But with diabetes, there's no subjective aspect to it. I mean, those numbers they give you for your A1c and those numbers you get on your glucose meter are just hard numbers. Nothing subjective, no guesswork. It's just the way it is. And when you find you've reduced from 17 to 5.8, you have done very well.